Okay, welcome back. I'm going to try and record this again. I keep getting interrupted by the phone calls. Just when the phone never rings until you start to record. Anyway, we're talking about texture here, so that's why there's a lovely, interesting background to try and jog your memory so that when you think of texture, you might remember this lovely bright green and this funny looking background. It might stay in your mind a bit more. And I was looking for a little echidna because I thought texture, nice and prickly. But believe it or not, clip art doesn't have echidnas, but they do have hedgehogs. So that's why we've got that little creature there. Okay, so in texture, you've only got to look for four things. You've got to be able to describe the texture. You've got to be able to identify the instruments. You've got to be able to just say what sort of phony it is. Please don't ever use that word phony in the actual exam. That's one of my made up ones just to help you remember. And D for diagram. For those of you who like their mind map, here we go. We've got texture again. Just to reinforce it, describe, identify your instruments, what sort of phony is it, and a diagram. And again, really important that if you can try and get that diagram in there. So, when you're describing texture, you have to think about is the texture thick or thin? And if you have a look at the little picture there, we've got three little instrumentalists. We've got a flute, a snare drum or a side drum, and a trumpet. Now that texture would actually be quite thin because it's only a trio. Okay, but if you had an orchestra, that would be really thick. So you can imagine things in between. They're thick, thin, medium, whatever it is. Does it sound thick with only a few instruments playing? This is especially true in rock music because the guitar, especially if they've got a lot of heavy distortion on the actual instrument, makes it sound, it gives it a really fat, thick sound. Okay, but there might only be still 3 or 4 instruments playing. And if it is an orchestra playing, or maybe a whole big band, like a jazz big band, you can use the word tutti. Now tutti means that everybody's playing at the same time. They don't have to be playing the same thing, it just means they're performing all together at the same time. So moving along, you then go to identify. Now you should know what you have to do here. You have to identify each instrument played in each section, so it's a bit like structure. Okay, briefly describe their role, who has the melody, who is the chordal accompaniment or the rhythmic accompaniment, who has the bass line, etc. Now sometimes that's not as easy to do and it's not as clear either. And is there any use of doubling? Now doubling means not doubling on a bike, we're talking doubling in instruments. So you might have, it's the same part being played but an octave apart. Imitation sounds like what it is, they're actually doing the same sort of thing. And state when, where and by who. So there might also be things like, what do you call it, being in unison as well, which is performing all together. The same note, same melody, all those bits and pieces. Okay. So phony, as I said, this is my made up word because it all comes back to something you'll see now. So what type of phony is being used? So you have to ask yourself, is it monophonic, which is one melodic line? So for example, you could have 100 people singing, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it would be monophonic, even though it'd be a thick texture because there's 100 people there, so it sounds thick. It would only be monophonic because it's only one melodic line. Now, if they started to do things like add in harmonies and add in a 4-part harmony with the choir, it would then be called homophonic, which is one melody with chordal accompaniment. Now that chordal accompaniment does not have to be from an instrument that can play chords. It can be anything. So you can have, if you think about the school's band, they play, most of their music is what's called homophonic. So there's some instruments playing the melody and the rest of the instruments are playing the accompaniment to give it, that melody, some support. And the last one is polyphonic. Now, a few years ago, they used to advertise these things called polyphonic ringtones, which meant that poly means many and phonic is some sort of sound. But in music, polyphonic means 2 or more melodies performed at the same time. And you also have to describe any harmony as similar motion or contrary motion. Now, similar motion means there's two or more instruments playing in something that looks like, if you drew them like in maths in parallel lines, that they might actually move in similar motions. They might they'll both go up or they'll both go down and have the same dips and highs and lows. Contrary motion means the opposite, where one instrument might be playing really high and another instrument plays low, and then the low instrument goes to high and the high instrument goes to low, and then they might meet in the middle and then separate again. So they'll be coming together and separating, and yeah, it looks a bit weird, but it sounds really effective. And is there any changes of phony between sections? State when, where, and by whom. So that phony, as you can see, it comes out of that word, those words monophonic, homophonic, polyphonic. Those three words you have to get right, especially in a texture question. And the last bit is diagram. Now, just like you would have done in structure, you also need to think about your diagrams, and you need to use a diagram and label where each instrument comes in and out of each section. And that's all you need to know for texture.